financial gap that Commissioner Lenarčič talked about yesterday, almost $100 billion a year in lacking funding to develop water infrastructure around the world. And that's why we're talking about that right now over this next 90 minutes. Bridging the financial gap, that's SDG 6, ensuring availability and sustainable management of water sanitation for all. How do we accomplish that in these next years? So we'll be talking to a panel on that. We begin with a keynote. We'll have the panel discussion, and then we'll have Q&A. We want to get you involved, along with tweeting with a hashtag. If you can send in your Q&A, look at the bottom of the screen. You see Q&A there. And we will have 2 breakout sessions as well. Our moderator for this panel is Severin, who is coordinator for international waters at GEF. Chris, how are you?
Yeah,
good to see you.
Good morning, or good morning here in DC at least, or good afternoon to you guys in Europe and in Africa and Asia. That's probably more evening, but very good to see you all today. I've been really looking forward to this. I mean, financing is something I've worked a lot with, of course, managing a wide portfolio of projects around the world. One thing that's a common theme in all this, of course, is that in order to do anything here, we need to work across these different economic sectors. There's no other way to get into sustainable development. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping we can look at today. If we are to be able to deal with the challenges we face and that we will be facing, unfortunately, I think that the current pandemic has had increased some of the constraints, but also opened up some opportunities. And maybe we can also hear about that today. I'm not sure, but I'm looking so much forward to it. And I don't want to be the one speaking here. I want to be listening to and present to you, first of all, our keynote speaker, and then these 2 very interesting panels in breakout groups. So, Catarina de Albuquerque, we are to listening to you now, talking about bridging the current financial gap for SDG 6. I hope you have the remedy. We need it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me today and giving me the opportunities to speak to you at this important gathering and on this important topic. Your focus on transformative approaches is both urgent and timely. It's a new year, and many of us are reflecting on the lessons from last year. And if nothing else, we have learned that business as usual is really not an option. Transformation is the only way forward, and water sanitation and hygiene are at the heart of how we transform. It's so basic, it's so fundamental. Without securing water, access to water, sanitation and hygiene, we all know that our ability to achieve the entire SDG agenda will be undermined. Our ability to respond and recover from this horrible and tragic global pandemic will be weak. Our ability to build resilient societies with enabling environments for all to prosper and to claim their human rights will be hampered. So now less than 10 years away from our 2030 deadline, we have a chance, we have an obligation to course correct. So firstly, a critical part of this course correction must include, as many have been already saying, include mobilization of financial resources to ensure universal access to water and sanitation. Many of you will be aware, and it has been mentioned today already, of the predicted amount we need for universal access by 2030. Approximately $113 billion per year, every year until 2030. I think that by today, because these calculations were done at the moment the SDGs were approved, and since we didn't keep up with the pace, these numbers are already outdated. And even if they weren't outdated, these numbers only cover capital expenses for basic services, and we do need more, and we do need better. So for instance, with decades of underinvestment in the sector, particularly outside urban areas, rural and smaller towns have been systematically neglected. Access to services in these areas is often, as many of us know, deplorable. COVID has exacerbated these inequalities and has also exposed the fragile situation of service providers in many countries. WASH is a critical preventive measure against COVID and future pandemics. And however, despite everything we know about the central role of water, sanitation and hygiene in the fight against COVID-19, we haven't seen an increase in financing for the sector. On the contrary, in fact, WASH is receiving a much smaller share of funding in comparison with other areas, and this share continues to, very surprisingly, decrease. And despite the global pandemic, despite headlines and warnings asking people to wash their hands, we also need more attention and investment targeted at the interlinkages between climate action and water, sanitation and hygiene. There are, and the 100 billion that I was referring to at the beginning, they don't take into account any climate related considerations. This was just a footnote. So there are ambitious and urgent targets for climate investments, but the discussion on water and sanitation in climate, including regarding finance, is unfortunately a gentle murmur. Less than 3% of overall climate finance goes to water-related projects. And of those funds, only a tenth is directed towards projects directed at ensuring water and sanitation services. And again, this needs to change. I don't stop saying the same. This must change. Water and sanitation and infrastructure are in themselves climate adaptation and climate mitigation measures. Flood and drought management makes cities more resilient. Wastewater treatment protects ecosystems and biodiversity. Recycling of wastewater increases water available for agriculture, contributing to food security. In short, we cannot build climate resilient systems with more attention to water and sanitation. Now, on the good news side, the good news is that we know what is needed, right? There are successful examples from all over the world, many of which were shared within our partnership, the Sanitation and Water for All partnership, at 3 regional finance ministers meetings that we hosted in November and December 2020. We also published a handbook for finance ministers, water and sanitation, how to make public investments work, which you can find online in 4 languages. And this handbook outlines 4 critical interventions to make sure countries make the required investments. Number 1, maximize value from existing public funding. Number 2, mobilize more funding by setting up adequate cost recovery policies, looking at tariffs, etc. 3, increase repayable domestic finance. And fourth, encourage innovation and least explored new approaches. A systematic problem in financing for water, sanitation and hygiene is that too often financing mechanisms or subsidies benefit those who already have access, rather than focusing on those who have been left behind. There is a very interesting study about subsidies done by the World Bank that shows this very clearly. This is, of course, unacceptable, and here I go again, and it must change. Additionally, there is another critical aspect for investments: political leadership and good governance. This is the backbone of an enabling environment, not only for delivering access to water and sanitation, but also sustainability. And it does not come for free. Beyond pipes, beyond taps, beyond latrines, we need a strong legislative framework, comprehensive policies that promote human rights, that protect civic space, that address corruption and inequalities, that ensure participation and transparency. Robust accountability mechanisms also require reliable resourcing, and ensuring enabling environment for water and sanitation has proven positive impact in other development areas. So it's a total win-win investment. And this brings me to my final point: the role of international cooperation. The challenges we face are interconnected and they are global. The solutions we seek must be grounded in solidarity, based on quality evidence, and aim towards more integrated approaches. How can development assistance help not only generate the urgently needed financial resources for the sector, but also contribute to the wider enabling environment for the realization of the rights to water and sanitation? What I was referring to before, to accountability mechanisms, to participation, independent regulation, good policies, good systems, good laws, etc. There is a role for external support agencies in advocating for the political prioritization of water, sanitation and hygiene, as well as supporting better learning across regions and across sectors. We need to see more consistent support through international cooperation for effective and sustainable accountability mechanisms, so that we all hold all actors responsible for the commitments they have made and states accountable for their legally binding human rights obligations. The Sanitation and Water for All Partnership, SWA, we are committed to doing our part. We will continue to elevate WASH in political agendas, both nationally, regionally, and globally. We will facilitate peer learning and matchmaking between stakeholders, and we will support greater accountability in the sector so that we can actually deliver on what we have promised. We will also continue to support an enabling environment where we have more participation, more transparency, better access to information, where we are better able to fight corruption. These are the fundamental ingredients to do what we need, which is change. And through change, achieving the rights to water and sanitation for all, always and everywhere. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. It's always very encouraging to hear, and when you meet fellow person that is burning for wastewater and sanitation. I thank you so much for bringing these perspectives in there. And then, of course, when you then try to do this, extrapolate it and do water cooperation in a basin and even between countries and the different sectors, then it becomes even harder. So this is indeed something that needs to be tackled and needs to be tackled rather fast, unfortunately. Without water, there's going to be very little development. That it's fairly clear. Both economic development, human prosperity, all these things are linked to water access. I wonder if there's any questions from the floor this morning. Afternoon. I have not seen many. No questions so far. But that doesn't matter. I think we still have a lot of panelists here. They may have a question to you or a comment before we break into the groups. If not, we can go straight into the breakouts, which can leave a little bit more time for discussion. But I would be interested in hearing a little bit, maybe. So you talk about all this financing, and I hear that very often. People say we just need some financing. And there are outlets like the GF and all the banks that we're going to listen to a little bit earlier today that there will be that has money available. But how do you finance your operation and the mandate that you have? How do you fulfill that?
Are you asking me the question? Is this
yes,
Catarina?
Yes,
okay,
that was
good.
Yeah.
I just want to understand. Good. So we are a multi-stakeholder partnership. We do not implement projects on the ground. We don't install pipes nor toilets. We work with our almost 300 partners. 80 of them are governments, plus civil society, the private sector, utilities, regulators, academic institutions, international finance institutions, bilateral donors, etc. And I'm sorry if I forgot somebody. And we work on advocacy. We work on changing policies at country level. We do matchmaking, exchange of experiences. We work a lot on mobilizing political will at the highest levels. We now have a Global Leadership Council composed of former heads of state and government. And our idea is to inspire, to make governments want to be bold and to make the change. How we are financed? We have a group of wonderful donors, and anyone today on the call who would like to be part of that group, most welcome. The more money, now it is very true, the more finance we have, the more we can do. I just had a talk today with a vice minister from Cambodia, another representative from Nepal, and they are eager to get support in order to be able to prepare better legislation, better policies in in order to make sure that there is better collaboration, better integration, that there is better alignment at country level between what the donors are doing, what they are doing, that we don't turn our backs to each other, but that we actually work together on a common agenda to make sure that we realize these rights and SDG 6 before 2030.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, SDG 6 and the many other associated SDGs, I would say. I mean, but then when you start looking at how do we deliver the policy, informing policy change, I think that's part of getting the money out the door, and that is one of the places where the chain often breaks. I would say, and we see that, right? There's some momentum politically, but then it might be a little hard to actually push the right information in to make the change. I understand that there's a question. I just don't see it in the chat, but maybe then Q&A. Let's see here. So there's a question here. What was the main takeaway of your meeting with the finance ministers? How can we support you in this discussion?
Thank you so much. We came up with 5 takeaways, basically. One is that financing priorities are determined politically, and water and sanitation must be pushed further up the political agenda to demonstrate their significance, as we were discussing right now, for social and economic development in order to secure adequate finance. Water and sanitation are human rights, and financing should reflect this. And moreover, we know that inaction is costlier than action. Number 2, COVID had negative impacts on funding streams, on access to services, on people's lives, while at the same time highlighting the importance of water, sanitation, and hygiene for health. So this is a message that the ministers conveyed, and this is something that politicians can use at the national level to increase understanding and also prioritization of WASH. Number 3, the climate crisis is affecting access to services through, as we know, extreme weather events, changes to patterns of rainfall and water resources, and the impact is being felt particularly by the most vulnerable and by the most disadvantaged populations. So resilience must be designed into all services, and resilience must have a human face in order to make sure that all services remain sustainable and do reach everyone. Number 4, green financing, green bonds, social impact bonds, and other innovative financing mechanisms can secure additional funding that supports both the delivery of better systems as well as long-term climate goals. And finally, governments must not work alone. In developing policies and strategies for financing services, this is something that came very clearly from the 3 meetings that we had, gathering over 60 ministers of finance. There are many opportunities through working with the private sector, with civil society, with academic institutions who have relevant expertise that can be harnessed through collaboration and cooperation. So these were some 5 key takeaways that we took. How to work, to collaborate. Join us, write to us, join us as partners. We have lots of work to be done. We do everything in a multi-stakeholder manner at the national level. We work with governments nationally to follow up on these finance ministers' meetings. For example, I see Céline Roberts from IFD. She participates in one of our working groups precisely on the topic of finance, where we are directly working with governments to identify bottlenecks, difficulties, in order to support them in overcoming them and in being able then to attract finance, to have the systems in place that will create the enabling environment indispensable to make sure that finance works. So for the gentleman, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Arnaud de join us, call me, send me an email.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that response. And I think Arnaud would be sending you an email soon so you can continue the discussion.
We have been already in contact.
I know. Yes, that's fine. But this was very good to hear some of these, some of the takes from what's happening behind the scenes. So I really appreciate that. There's a couple of questions in the chat box, and but this is more in general on the logistics side, because as I understand it, we are we're jumping from this panel right here, this screen, into another room. It's nearly like being at a real conference. So we are changing. We all get lost in the corridors, and we come a little late into the next session, and then we'll be there. There's 2 breakouts. They're both fantastic panels. 4 speakers in each, all from financing organizations, and then we will be then we'll convene listening to the different banks and the different investors sitting in these 2 groups, and then we reconvene. Please don't take too long a coffee break before we come back to reconvene and be part of finalizing here. But oh, there's a question that just came in as I was speaking. What is this? Let's see. Pandemic. This is from Jose Frade. Pandemic is a short term. I can't see this.
I can see it.
Yeah, but I can't because there's anyway. So pandemic is a short threat, and climate change a long one, both attracting lots of additional funds. Why is WASH not capturing the same attention and support? Yeah, well, I have my take on that, but I'll get up, please.
I would like to hear you, Chris.
I'm so one of the things I've been contemplating this because I've been sitting working from home for the last 10 months, right? The World Bank is shut down. We're not allowed to go into the offices. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, this is a very immediate threat. So all of a sudden, politicians are filling in funds that we've never seen before released in such a speed. That's something that's an immediate threat. Whereas, as we know, climate change and the water issues that we're facing globally, I mean, and all the SDGs basically, they're long-term things. Most of them are long-term threats. We can let them stay for a while. The cost is going to be astronomical if we don't deal with it. But we can live for at least 5-10 years. Some places less, but we can live fine. Or at least live. So the cost is something we push in front of us, and it's just hard to get politicians to release the same amount of attention to the climate agenda. It would have been absolutely amazing. Just imagine how far we could have gone with the money that was, if we could have released the same into climate. And here we even have the data. I mean, we have the climate data that supports, that tells us what we are facing. But getting a wake-up call on politicians is not so easy.
Now, it's not that easy. And we were analyzing with a company the attention that the media pays to different topics. If you look at gender, if you compare water and sanitation, then with gender, then with climate seems to be getting much more attention than gender, gender and water. When you superpose it with COVID, everything else disappears. But I think that Jose was also asking why among the 3 is WASH even getting less attention than climate and COVID. And I think that we have some ideas. I think that maybe this is a very technical sector that brings around the table very technical people that know how to do their job well in terms of installing the pipes, installing the toilets, etc. But we are not yet there in terms of the advocacy that it takes, reaching out to the higher political levels, to the heads of state, to the heads of government. This is why last year we did a call to action on COVID and water and sanitation with the heads of state and heads of government to bring to lift it a little bit up. But I think there is a chronic problem when you compare crisis with chronic issues, right? And the chronic issues are much more silent than the crisis. And the politicians hear what is more noisy. And somehow we have failed to make people feel outraged at the situation we are living when it comes to water, sanitation and hygiene. I think that we need to make more noise. We need to call more on governments, on those who have the legal obligations to realize these rights, to invest in them, to prioritize them, etc. So I think there is a lot. I think that the key answer here is political will, political awareness, and raising the advocacy and the engagement at the highest political level.
Okay, yeah. No, I think you're right. The wastewater agenda and people working in WASH needs to be more loud. I mean, it is the wastewater is a massive issue, and we do need to get more loud when we talk to our politicians about it. There's one more question. We have a minute and a half before we have to join the breakout groups here. And this is in French as far as I understand. And even though our wonderful host, sounded like I was speaking French, I'm not. I'm from Denmark, so I can't do any French.
But I can answer.
It has been translated here. So are there serious cross-sectorial co-financing opportunities? Surely there are modalities for energy utilities to incentivize water utilities, which are major energy consumers, and the technology provides opportunities. In the long run, will this improve the utilities balance sheets? I don't know if you have a take on that.
Okay, now I see it. Are there serious cross-sectoral co-financing opportunities? Surely there are modalities for energy utilities, which are major energy consumers, technology provider in the long run. Yes, I think that there are risks. There are obviously opportunities of cross-sectoral financing opportunities. You are mentioning energy. There can be even other areas. So I think so. I guess so. And I've seen it happening in some countries, especially this nexus that you mentioned, the energy with wash. I've seen it happening in some countries.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Apparently I was wrong. This is from Manuka, so I'm sorry about that. And then there's a question from Niger, but I'm not sure what that translates to.
It's about civil society. It's about civil society.
Yeah.
Yes, I can answer bilaterally.
But what we will do, we have to break into the rooms now, so we'll have to leave the questions here, and we'll be coming back to them. And those that cannot be answered, if you leave your email, we'll be very happy to continue the discussion. So let me just introduce the two groups. We have group one with Chileshe, Interim Global Director for WaterAid in Southern Africa. Karine Measson, Head of Water Management Division in EIB, European Investment Bank. Céline Robert, Head of Water and Sanitation Division from French Development Agency. And Dominique Gatel, Vice President of Public Affairs and Water in the Veolia environment. So that's group one. Group two, then we have Thomas Yanagiev, Water Supply and Sanitation Specialist from the World Bank. Good afternoon, Thomas. Francis Bourgois, Manager for Water Coordination and Partnership Division of African Development Bank. Marcus Theobald, Head of Cooperation EU Delegation to Lesotho. And Leonard Chang Quateri, Policy Analyst, Water Citizen Network in Ghana. So I hope that you'll be joining the groups in equal measures. We will have Arnaud, the team leader for Water, the Environment, European Commission, heading up Group 1, and I'll be moderating Group 2. So I hope to see you all in a very short time. And you see out in the chat, the two group links are there, so please join those.